he was shouting, "Mom, Mom," and it sounded like they just connected. And he was like, "It's me, Yusuf," I think his name was, and "It's me." And suddenly, they disconnected,
Oh,
and he went wild. He kind of like had this PTS thing. He just needed to talk to her so badly, and he just flipped, and he started throwing chairs around and flinging things, and
oh,
people were getting hit with things. And I was there, and I had to do something. And he like flung this big chair against the wall, and I ran up and I grabbed his hand, and I was saying, "You're safe now. You're safe. It's okay. It's okay." Hello, this is Sally McNally. Welcome back to the Bleedin' Truth. I'm here tonight with my daughter Bridget.
how's it going? So, we wanted to start off today's podcast by first thanking you guys so much for all the positive feedback that we've gotten. It's been really overwhelming, and we are really grateful that you guys are interested and excited about Sally's stories. So, thank you so much for all of that. I'm not sure what today's story is going to be, so, Sally, do you mind setting the scene?
Well, I've been watching the news a lot lately, and it's all stories from Ukraine and the awful war that's happening over there with Russia. And it brings my mind back to a war that I experienced when I lived in Saudi Arabia, the war with Iraq. I have some stories I'd like to share with you tonight about that.
All right, well, I'm really interested in hearing about it. But before we get into your story, we have a couple quick announcements and reminders. So, number one would be listener discretion is advised. A lot of Sally's stories can be disturbing to some people, so listen at your own discretion. Also, Sally is on call tonight, so if we have to take a pause because she gets called into work, we will, and we'll get back to the rest of the story another time. And then the third thing is thank you guys already for starting to ask questions to our question forum. If you guys didn't know already, we are, you know, letting you guys ask Sally any question regarding midwife stuff, yoga stuff, prenatal, anything even to do with her stories, and we'll answer them on the podcast. So we're gonna get started. We already have two questions, so I'm gonna ask you, Sally. We'll do that, and then we'll get right into her story.
That's so great. I'm so happy people have questions.
Alrighty, so starting with Sarah Cardenas from Santa Paula, she wants to know what helped you decide to go the midwife route, and where and when in your life did you start having the passion? Was it before nursing school, during, or years into your career?
Oh, thank you so much for that wonderful question, Sarah. Um, I remember when I was finishing up with my registered nursing, I got a job working in a gynae unit for a little while in the hospital where I trained. And I had two roads diverging in a wood, and I didn't know which one to take. On one hand, I loved anything to do with psychiatry, and I wanted to study that. And the other road was midwifery, and I wanted to study that. So I remember that this week I got an invitation to come for an interview as a student for psychiatric nursing. And I went to it, and it was great fun. I really enjoyed it. It was the most fun interview I've ever had in my life. And I really felt like I nailed it. I even had one of the people interviewing me doing a headstand during the interview. Like really was like that. It was really fun because they wanted to know all about my yoga. But I was then went back to work, of course, and I was working on the unit. And I remember the head nun of the hospital. Remember the Medical Missionaries of Mary. Um, she came to me, and I was in the middle of work, and I was all sweaty and body fluids and working hard, and it was hard work then. And she came to me and she says, "They're interviewing for the midwifery, and I've put your name in."
Oh, wow.
She said, "Come to my office right now." And I was like, wow, I kind of do want to do midwifery, but I've just done this other interview. So I went to her office and she sat me down and she said, "Now, there's only a few spots for this, and I want you to go over and give the best interview you've ever done in your life." And I said, "But look at, I'm all dirty. I'm coming from the unit. I'm covered in body fluids." And she said, "You're grand. Here is my underarm deodorant." And she gave me roller because I probably smelt like I was working. And I had to go from one building over to the next building. The other building was an old building that was the midwifery unit, and this is where they were having the interview. And it was raining outside, and she brought me to the door of the hospital and she put on me her cape. You know, you see nurses sometimes with big long capes, and she put her cape on me and she handed me an umbrella and she said, "Go into your future." And
Oh,
I
wow.
I remember in my little white shoes and my little white nurse's hat and my little white dress and her cape and this umbrella. And I remember running in the rain over to that building and thinking, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's midwifery. And I felt so sure of it
Oh,
that
wow.
I've never looked back. It's been just the best. And I can remember the first uh, day that I got to actually be a student on the unit. um, I came to the unit, and I there was a stairs up to where they were delivering the babies, and I came in all kind of shy and nervous, and I don't think I'd actually ever seen a baby being born at that stage. And suddenly, this midwife shouted down the stairs, "Are you Sally?" And I said, "I am." And she says, "Get your ass up here right now." And I ran up the stairs, and somebody hung over my neck and around my body this big, long rubber apron. And they pushed me into this labor room, and there was the baby crowning. And they put gloves on me and they brought me over, and it was like amazing. I remember they took my hands, and this was my first day as a
Wow.
student in the unit, and they placed my hands on the baby's head crowning, and I can remember that nurse whispering in my ear, "Just let it out slowly, let it out slowly." And her hands on top of my hands, guiding my hands. It was the best ever. It often reminded me of, a, somebody making a precious piece of pottery out of a piece of clay. It felt like this most beautiful little being was coming out of, this amazing moment. And the mother just seemed so peaceful. And yet, of course, she was in the throes of having a baby. She couldn't stop pushing, and the baby just came out so nice. And the midwife looked at me, she says, "There you are now. That's number one of 40," because we had to get 40. And I'm like, wow. Of course, I had a lot to
Wow.
learn. But yeah, that was my first experience of being a young student midwife. We called ourselves pupil midwives.
That's incredible.
It was great.
I
I
really, when you were describing that, I could really picture, like, you illustrated it so well of you running in the rain. And
Yeah, that all really happened. It was
wow.
like, it was so wonderful. What a great nun she was.
Yeah.
It- Yeah, she was really
That's
good.
amazing. Well, great question. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Alrighty, so we have one more. As a reminder, you don't have to be you don't have to say your name for the questions. You can be totally anonymous as well, so that's completely fine. This question is anonymous, and they want to know, what would you suggest to somebody who experienced a traumatic birth and difficult postpartum period and who is about to give birth again? How to deal with the fear of another C-section that is required? And further, do you think C-sections can be avoided more in the US? Do we jump to using them too frequently, or is it just easier for OBGYNs? And then they added, not a question, I just think you're amazing, Sally. Hope to
Oh,
have you
thank
during my first
you.
pregnancy. That is really sweet.
Oh, that's so adorable. Thank you so much. And of course, any thought of surgery, it's so invasive, right? You think, oh my gosh, it's huge to have had a cesarean section, and many young mothers who have their first baby unexpectedly by cesarean section, they are suffering from post-traumatic stress often, and they need to find a way to talk about it, write about it, shout about it, but get it out, some way to get it out, so that it's the experience of the first birth doesn't become now the experience of the second birth. So what I would advise is to find somebody to talk to and to describe in detail everything you can remember about the first birth. And then when you find that you come across a part of the story that makes you cry, you might stop and investigate and explore that. Were you afraid at that part? Did you feel violated? Did you feel out of control? Did you feel terrified? What was that emotion? And stay with it until you understand it, and then go on and stop every time the emotions come up. I have a little hypnosis script that I should share for you for that just it's like a little self hypnosis script to go through what you have been through, the reality of your first birth, and then to create in your mind what you would love for the second birth, to go like the second birth, if it's going to be cesarean, then it'll be planned, it'll be organized, there won't be any labor to begin. So right there, it's going to be a little bit easier that way. And to visualize yourself getting ready that morning or that afternoon and going to the hospital, and being happy that it's a beautiful thing, you're going to go and meet this beautiful little child, and then to visualize the baby coming to you as well, that both of you are on this journey together. But then to visualize the nurses getting you ready, putting up the IV, getting into your gown, and all the while visualizing yourself with a beautiful smile, and your partner there, and all of the joy of a birth, and not the fear of maybe the fear and the sadness that a woman can go through when she doesn't have the birth that she's planned. And it can cause a lot of sadness inside. And some women grieve for years when they don't have a birth that they had planned, or that they end up with a birth that they don't understand what happened. Why did I have that happen to me? Why is my baby in the NICU? Why does my baby not want to breathe or breastfeed? Or there's sometimes they're left with the question. And I think it's really important very soon after a birth, especially if it's been traumatic, to talk about it, to talk the next day, to ask questions, get your obstetrician, your midwife in, and sit them and say, tell me what happened? Why did it end up like that? Because often during the event, it might be an emergency, or if communication didn't happen, if it's not a shared decision, you feel like something precious has been taken away that you can't ever get back again. I know I teach childbirth classes, and I just love women preparing their birth plan and getting it in their mind the way they want it. Now, making a birth plan doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get exactly that, because sometimes we used to say, how do you make God laugh? Show him your birth plan, right? But there might be one or two wee things in there that, you're not going to end up getting. But if it goes completely the other way and you end up having a cesarean section, that can be very difficult. I understand. But then to make it your own. If you know you're going to have a cesarean section, come in armed with the things you would for a nice, normal, natural birth. Bring your music, bring your hypnosis scripts, bring your partner, bring anything that you think is going to help you, a focal point. bring your birth plan and put these things on a birth plan and talk to your obstetrician and say, you know, I had this type of experience the first time, and now this is the way I'd like it. If possible, what can we do here to make my birth as joyful as possible,
Yeah.
right?
And so I have a question, just because, I haven't gone through this. When a woman has a C-section for a first birth, why is it that it's required for the follow-up birth or any future ones?
That's such a great question. Thanks for that, Bridget, because um, some obstetricians and anesthesiologists especially are going to worry that the C-section scar can open during labor, that the pressure of the contractions and the stretching and the thinning of the lower uterine segment during labor can open that scar. And I've seen that happen.
Oh,
I saw, I saw a baby over in Saudi who had his wee arm out of the cesarean section and into the mother's abdomen
oh wow.
when they came in. Yeah, I mean, they worked out fine. They were rushed to the OR and the baby was born just fine. But that's a very rare, rare occasion. And why that happened to that lady was she'd had multiple cesarean sections, I think 4 or 5.
Wow.
And of course, over time, that scar area is being used over and over again.
So in that case, then, if it's being used over and over again, doesn't that also make that area just weaker instead
Yeah.
of, the
Yeah.
possibility of doing a natural childbirth still? Have you
Well,
seen natural childbirths still occur after a C-section previously?
many, many. I've seen many women deliver their babies naturally following a cesarean section.
Okay.
Yes, I have, and it is possible. But the hospitals have to be careful, because they don't want to put you in danger. So they have criteria to keep you safe. Things like this. They want you to keep your BMI below like 37 or below. I think that's the number now.
Okay.
You can't be diabetic. You can't have a baby that's over like 9.5 pounds in there.
Oh wow.
I think that's the weight. The baby has to be less than that. Um, yeah, and you can only have had one cesarean section before. So
Gotcha.
there's safety rules that should be followed, and but so we call it now a TOLAC, a trial of labour after cesarean, and then if you are successful and safely deliver your baby by your vagina, then it becomes a vaginal birth after C-section, a VBAC. And most hospitals that we deliver babies in here will allow you to have a trial of labour after cesarean. They don't let you be induced, and they won't let you, be augmented with pitocin very often. It's very controlled. There has to be extra staff, involved in that care. But mostly, if you fall in those safety criteria, then they'll let you do it.
So just looking back at our question, they were wondering, could C-sections be more avoided in the US?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think yes. I think that women sometimes get epidurals too early, and then it might stop the labor, and then it seems like she's having this extra, extra long labor when in actual fact we just put her out of labor. And I think what happens is we have to give you a litre of fluid before your C section, and that washes away a lot of the oxytocin, your own natural hormone that's making you contract. And sometimes after an epidural, there might be a little dip in your blood pressure, and then you have to get another litre of fluid, and that again washes away the oxytocin. Um, so that might lead to a longer early labour stage or active labour.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I
But
just learned
yeah.
a lot too, so thank you. I think that
But
was a
I
really good
think
question.
Yeah, but I think that we should talk more about that because there's a lot for us all to learn in that area. Um, like uh, positioning is really important. Now we're all learning how important it is to be in more of an upright position to allow the baby to come down, even if you have an epidural. And also, if the baby's, coming down a little crooked or maybe facing the front of a mom's pelvis, that might be a longer labour. And to really get working on positioning the mother's body to help the baby gravitate down and come through that pelvis.
Hmm.
So there's a lot that we can do rather than just immediately go for a C-section. But we have great bundles now where we follow in the hospital. That actually just happened to me tonight up there in the hospital. Um, One of our ladies, she was making slow progress,
Hmm.
and so there was a decision made that she should have a cesarean, and a very brave little charge nurse. And she's young and she's going to be a midwife herself. She came and she stood up for the patient and said, well, it does, what you're asking for is not falling into the criteria. She needs a little more time before we can say she's, failure to progress in labour.
Hmm.
So we got more time, and lo and behold, the next thing she's pushing, and we're so happy and
Oh,
pleased.
wonderful.
And we had a lovely normal birth. Yeah, great
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
That was just today then. That was earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So um, yeah, there's a like across America there's like 30% C-section rate.
Wow.
We had managed to get our rate down here, like 24% at one stage I heard. And yeah, it's a
I know
lot.
that your goal has always been natural
Yes.
childbirth. Yeah. You
Yeah.
teach your natural childbirth classes for a long time as well.
Yeah. I loved that class. Yes, so
Yeah.
much. Um, when we're admitting a woman in the hospital, one of the questions is, do you have pain medication plan? Or what's your plan for your birth? And so many women, there's a few that'll say, epidural, sign me up, I'm ready now. But most women, they have a kind of a secret desire to have a natural birth. They want to see what it's like.
Yeah.
But then when labour kicks in and their mind starts playing tricks with them, they'll believe the thoughts because especially first time moms, they've never had a baby before and the mind is going, what is this? This can't be right. There's something wrong. And her mind might be shouting at her, you're going to die. And she might believe it because she's never experienced
Yeah.
something like this happening in her body before. And learning natural childbirth coping techniques can really help a woman be ready for that so that when her mind starts doing that, she can look up at her monkey mind and say, it's okay, we're safe, it's uncomfortable maybe a little bit, but we're safe and it's only for a short time and we're going to get through this.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
there's, a lot of little tricks that we have to help a woman with that.
Well, absolutely fantastic. Thank you again for that question. And I know you're talking about your hypnosis videos. I'll also link in the description of this podcast. Sally has another YouTube channel where she does some hypnosis videos, also yoga and relaxation stuff, guided imagery. So if you are interested in seeing some of that, you can definitely check them out there. We'll also be hopefully making a lot more of the hypnosis content, so that could be very helpful as well. All right, so it's story time.
So, story time. So, when I was living and working over in Saudi Arabia, there was a war with Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was very angry with Saudi. He was bringing the war um, to Saudi Arabia. Uh, so he was firing Scud missiles in our direction where I lived. Of
Oh,
course, none of
shoot.
them reached us. But whenever there was a Scud missile coming towards Saudi, all of these alarms would go off. And I kind of get a little uneasy when I'm watching CNN and I can hear those
Oh,
sirens in the
wow.
background.
For Ukraine.
Yeah, it gives me a wee bit of like my own kind of PTSD. And then, of course, there's Wolf Blitzer. How old is Wolf Blitzer? He's still on the go. He was the same fella giving the news on CNN. CNN, we could get that. And I can remember him saying, and the alarms are going off, and there's Scud missiles and going in the direction. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like living the past. But anyway,
Wow.
um, our experience with that was that we were afraid that the missiles that were being shot in our direction were going to be full of or covered in nerve gas and mustard gas,
Whoa.
which of
Yeah.
course are both deadly and horrible chemical nerve agents that are of course banned throughout the world. Um, so we were terrified of this, and in our apartments where we lived, when this war was going on, we had our windows taped up. So all around the crack between the wall and the window ledge, we'd have to put a really thick, big tape all
Yeah.
around there, and then we'd have to have our bath full of water in the event that we were covered with mustard gas or nerve gas. That we would immediately jump into the
Oh my
water.
gosh. Yeah.
Yes, we had to keep the bath full of water. That was part of the rules. And our hospital was emptied out of all the regular patients. They were all sent down to the county hospital, which is not as nice as our county hospital. It was a very scary place. But even our pregnant women were all sent off down there. And the hospital then was prepared for casualties coming from the front line of the war.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yeah, and I can remember setting it up and getting ready, and we had like weeks to get this ready, and we were like, "What war? What war?" And then every now and then, siren, and we'd run and hide, and
Yeah.
but then we had no patients for a wee while, and each bed was all sorted with bandages and IV tubing and IV fluids, and then it happened. Somebody said, now the soldiers are coming from the front line. There had been tent hospitals out in the front near the fighting, and now they were going to be flown to our area. So um, first, I had to train in the decontamination tank, which was right outside the hospital. It was built just specially so that when we bring people in, if they were covered in gases, we would have special way of washing them down. Now, this is the desert. This is a place where you can fry an egg on the rock, and I've done that.
Oh,
You can
wow.
fry your egg on a rock.
Yeah.
It was so hot. We had to wear these decontamination outfits. So they were really big, clunky, old-fashioned style, kind of like a big diving suit and a big, huge helmet.
Holy smokes.
So we'd train and we'd
A
spend,
hazmat suit.
I think it was like, yeah, it was hazmat suit, old style. And it was like 40 minutes in the suit and then maybe 10, 15 minutes out of the suit. And we had to train like that to get used to the heat because you were sweating in
Wow.
there. And then we'd have to train that we'd get out of the suit without touching anything, and we'd shower ourselves, breathe a little bit, and then back into the suit. But one funny story there was we had these little men from the Philippines who were nurses' aides, and they were helping us to train. So we were the decontaminators, and they were the ones supposedly coming in covered with the nerve agents and stuff. So we had to wash them down. So they'd come in pretending that they were sick, and we'd put them on a trolley and wash them down with a hose.
Oh,
I thought that was really weird. But we had to learn how to do it in a timely fashion and wash every part of them.
wow.
Um, but then somebody said, what if the mustard gas gets in your eyes? So somebody had this great idea that we should wash it out with salty water. So somebody had like some big container, and we were practicing washing out, and the poor guys, their eyes were all red and burning because it was way too salty, whatever mixture somebody had made up. And there was four Filipino men sitting there, and they looked like they were really sad, crying like raccoons' eyes. Um,
Oh man.
I know, I was so sorry for them. So we decided that it should be just plain water. But then, then we were pretty much ready. We were told to load up the buses, go to the airport and load up the buses. So we went off
Like load
ready
up the
to,
buses with patients?
yes, with patience.
Wow.
Um, and we didn't know what kind of injuries they were going to have, what kind of patients we were going to
And
have.
you're trained
So
as a midwife, not as
yeah,
a frontline.
yeah, so there were like little ambulances
Yeah.
with like a place for four people on stretches. Um, I remember was in charge of one, and I went out to the airport, I think like six times, and brought people back. But
Wow.
I remember being so shocked. They were all Egyptian soldiers that we picked up,
Hmm.
uh, and some of them had lost their limbs, their eyes. Some of them had lost parts of their hands, and they were just blown to smithereens. But I remember this one really young guy, and he kept on saying, he couldn't see because his eyes were all covered. And I was trying to calm him down because he was terrified. He didn't know where he was. He thought he was going home. And
Yeah.
we said, no, you're in Saudi Arabia now, and we're bringing you to the hospital. And he was freaking out, and he was saying, no, I want to go home. I want to go home. And he pulled out his wallet, and he said, this is my mother. And he kept on trying to point to where he thought the picture was. And he said, that's my mother. You must tell her where I am. You must tell her where I am. And he must have been
Wow.
like about 18 or 19,
Oh,
poor
that's so
fella.
sad.
So I remember telling him, we'll find your mother, we'll tell her, we'll make sure that she knows where you are. But then when we got to the hospital was just filling up, and all those empty beds that we had ready, all of a sudden, like within a day, they were full. The hospital was buzzing with all of this activity.
And you
And
had to wash all of them down?
well, no, these had been washed down out in the desert, but
Okay.
this decontamination tank was just in case the nerve gas and the mustard gas got to where we were, I guess.
Okay, gotcha.
Um, but anyway, sorry about that confusing part of the story.
It's
Um,
okay.
so the contest started. Who had the most shrapnel in their body? Each soldier was given a little glass jar by the bedside, and every day we'd go around cleaning their wounds. And these were the kind of wounds that you couldn't pack or close over. You had to keep it open
Oh,
because it healed from the inside to the outside,
right.
and that way it would push the shrapnel out of their limb.
Oh, wow.
I know it was horrible. Some of them, of course, needed major surgery, but a
Yeah.
lot of them had these huge, big chunks of metal, like sticking down into their body. So
Wow.
sometimes we'd be able to like clean it, and after a few days, we'd be able to pick it out with a forceps and put it into their jar. And then the contest was on who has the most
Were they
shrapnel.
all like in on it?
Yeah, they were all, you know, and they were so interesting. Some of them were like teachers, some of them
Oh,
were,
wow.
like bankers, some of them were soldiers themselves, but
Yeah.
they all like volunteered to come and help the Saudis. And the poor guys, they got put on the front line. It was really, really
Wow.
sad. So all of the casualties that were in that hospital were Egyptian. There was no Saudis, there were no Americans. And one day I remember one poor fella, he was big, big, strong man. He had like a big wound on his back, but he was able to walk around, and he was on this phone. They had this phone that we pushed to the bedside, and he was trying to call his mother in Egypt, and
Hmm.
the line was really poor, and he was like he was shouting, "Mom, Mom," and it sounded like they just connected. And he was like, "It's me, Yusuf," I think his name was, and "It's me." And suddenly, they disconnected,
Oh,
and he went wild. He kind of like had this PTS thing. He just needed to talk to her so badly, and he just flipped, and he started throwing chairs around and flinging things, and
oh,
people were getting hit with things. And I was there, and I had to do something. And he like flung this big chair against the wall, and I ran up and I grabbed his hand, and I was saying, "You're safe now. You're safe. It's okay. It's okay." And he just slumped down onto the floor. I can still see him in the white pajamas, of all things, white pajamas, and the little blood stain coming out onto his back, and him crying and crying like a baby and calling for his mother. And I thought it was just the saddest of things. And
poor guy.
yeah, poor guy. And then the last one that really stands out in my mind was a very young soldier who had horrific injuries. His legs had been blown off, half of his bottom was blown off, his genitals were blown off, and he was actually dying with us. But I can remember every day holding him in my arms. And we used to kind of take turns with him, because he was like a big child. He was so sad, and he held me this day, and I had his head like on my shoulder, and I was kind of rocking him back and forth because there wasn't a whole lot we could do.
Wow.
It was like it was down to the basic
Oh my gosh.
human contact, human touch. And he was calling me mother, mother, mother. And it was so sad. And it was like what really hits me about these soldiers, all of the ones that stood in my mind thought about their mother when life was so hard, and of course I see mothers, I see women becoming mothers, and we may not know how important our job is, or how the effect of our love for our children can be. But, to witness these soldiers hurting so much, and they weren't looking for their lovers, or, they were looking for their mothers. If they could just be with their mothers,
Wow.
everything would be better.
Making me tear up.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But for anybody who's listening to this, if you're a mother, our jobs are so important. The love that we pour into our babies and our children, it comes back to us. It does.
I love you, Mom. So,
Well, the poor soldiers, right? They went through this war, they got blown to smithereens. So the Saudis were very appreciative. So this day, these dignitaries, princes, and people from the government came to give each soldier a gift of a certain amount of money and a very expensive watch. Each soldier, they went to each bed and they presented this great gift, and it was such a wonderful thing. And then they left, and each soldier had a bit of money, and he had this lovely watch. It was a lovely watch, mind you. But the next day, when I came on duty, there was a big fuss, and the armed guards and soldiers, because it was an army hospital, remember, they were shouting, and they were going around saying that there was thieves after being arrested, and they would find the money, and they would find the watches that were stolen. So the girls told me that during the night, two housekeepers had stolen two of the watches and two soldiers' amount of money that they had been given.
oh jeez.
I know. So, and of course, they were arrested and thrown in the little jail that was connected to the hospital. And the word was that they were going to get their hands chopped off that Friday, because that is what happens to a thief. A thief will have their right hand chopped off. Um, and the idea is that they won't eat with, they would clean their hand with their left, they would clean their bottom with their left hand, so they're not going to eat with that hand. So, of course, there's right-handed and left-handed people over there, but that was the idea, that they would take off the right hand and then they would starve to death because they wouldn't eat with the dirty hand, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But anyway, so that was to be their fate. They were going to get their hand chopped off on that Friday, and I think Friday was the next day. And I knew these girls. I knew these girls, and
Oh, wow.
worked alongside them for a long time, and I loved them, and I knew all their families, and of course I knew they came from really poor areas in the Philippines, and they were sending, their money home to their family. And I don't know what got into them that they thought that this was a good idea. So I went to the head captain, and I went in and I sat down. I said, please let me talk to the girls. Let me get the watches and the money back. And he said, no, they will pay the punishment and that's all. And then they're going back to jail. And I said, please, there must be some way. This is not a punishment you should do for somebody who's not Saudi. They, are not from this country. And he said, no, they broke our law. This
Oh,
is
wow.
a punishment. So I begged and pleaded with him, and he said, if they admit to their sin, I will put them on the plane back to the Philippines tonight. If they admit to what they've done. And I said, okay, let me go talk to them. So he allowed me to go down and talk to them. And the two of them were sitting there in the corner saying the rosary. They were praying, saying the rosary. And I came in and I said, girls, do you know the trouble that you're in? Do you know that the plan is to have your hands amputated? And the two of them looked up and they said, we didn't do it. It's not us. We're innocent. We didn't do it. And I looked at one and I said, are you guilty? Did you do it? And she said, no. And immediately my sense was, she did it. I knew, and I knew my time was short. I
Yeah.
had to get the truth out. Um, so I asked the guard to take this one into the next cell so that I could talk to the weak one.
Mm.
So I separated them, right?
Yeah.
And the weaker one, I said to her, "You have to tell me the truth. You have to save yourself. You can be on the plane home to your family tonight if you just tell me the truth." And she was shaking her head, saying, "No, no, I didn't. I didn't. I would never do that. I didn't do that." And I said, "Tell me the truth." And I remember grabbing her by the arms and slamming her up against the
Oh
wall. I
my
said, "You
gosh.
have to tell me the truth." And it was like an exorcism. It was like the truth. And she immediately then said, "I did it, and I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done it." So
Wow.
I could go to the other one and say, now she's admitted it. And so the two of them then admitted their crime. I brought them back to the captain, and he said, great, now you must give me the watches and the money. Well, the girls had gone that morning and sent the money home to the Philippines.
Oh,
Yeah, couldn't send the watches, so the watches were found in their possession. But in the end, I had to run to two Egyptian doctors that I knew because the money was in Egyptian currency,
oh
and I
my
had to
gosh.
like beg and plead, please give me the money so that I can save the girls, and we'll give you back the money as soon as we can. And that's what happened. We reproduced the same amount of money, we reproduced the
Oh my
watches,
gosh.
and the girls were sent home.
Wow.
Yes, I
That's
know.
wild.
Yeah. I got a letter from one of them like about 6 months later, and she told me that she was praying for me and she was so grateful. Yeah. And
Wow.
I wish I could remember their names. They were so sweet.
That is really wild.
Yeah. But I will tell you about things like that I would have witnessed, that are pretty horrific. I'll tell you in another podcast because this has gone on too long.
Stop saying that. It's been great.
All right. Thanks, Bridget.
Well, that was an incredible story. You really are a great storyteller. I get so wrapped up into it,
Aw.
and I feel like I'm reading a movie script of your life.
Aw. Thanks a million.
Thanks a
You're so
million.
And thanks everybody who might be listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends. If you know anybody who'd be interested in these stories, please send them our way. We're very grateful that you're here tonight listening to us.
Thanks again. Yeah. And if you want to ask her a question, I'll make sure to put that link again in the description and we'll answer it on the next podcast. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks so much. Thanks a million.
Thanks a million.